Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we distill complex information into strategic insights you can actually use.
And today, we are really getting into it.
We're tackling what the CISSP calls the foundational engine of security, Domain 2, asset security, and data protection.
It's such an essential area. You know, for anyone preparing for the cert, Domain 2 is about, what, 10% of the exam? But the concepts, I mean, things like defining value, classification, ownership.
It's the bedrock.
It is. It's the bedrock that all the other security domains are built on. You can't apply the right controls until you really understand the strategic importance of what you're trying to protect.
Absolutely. And our mission today isn't just to, read off a list of definitions.
No, not at all.
It's to go beyond that. We want to provide the strategic understanding that the CISSP exam demands. We'll navigate the critical roles, the regulatory landmines, the data lifecycle, so you get why these concepts actually matter to the business.
Okay, let's unpack it.
So we have to start at, well, the beginning, defining an asset. In InfoSec, this definition is so much broader than most people think. It's not just the hardware you can see and touch.
That's exactly right. An asset is really anything that holds value to the organization. And while, the tangible stuff, servers, laptops, even real estate are obvious,
Sure.
the most critical category, and honestly the most vulnerable one, is the intangible.
So we're talking about the data itself, PII, PHI, proprietary schematics, software, IP.
Intellectual property, yeah. And critically, the organization's brand and reputation. I've even seen the term resources used pretty much interchangeably with asset.
And that intangible nature, I assume, makes valuing it incredibly difficult.
It makes it incredibly complex. The value is almost never just the monetary cost of buying the thing. I mean, look, if a server costs $5,000,
Okay.
but it holds the trade secrets for a billion-dollar product, the asset is clearly worth a whole lot more than $5,000.
So when we're trying to analyze an asset's value, what are the the core components we have to think about?
The list is pretty exhaustive. I mean, yes, you start with the cost to acquire it and set it up, but then you immediately have to factor in the potential loss if it's confidentiality, integrity, or availability were compromised.
And that includes things like regulatory fines, legal liabilities.
Right, legal liabilities tied to regulated data, and of course the cost to actually remediate an incident after it happens.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. This is the point that moves it from an IT cost conversation to a real security strategy conversation. The sources all highlight this surprising fact.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
It's the potential value that this asset represents to a competitor if they suddenly got their hands on it.
Exactly. I mean, if your competitor gets access to your secret algorithm, your loss isn't just recovery costs, it's lost market share. It's lost competitive advantage for the next, 5 years.
And that potential future loss is what really drives the budget for the security controls.
It has to.
So, okay, we need to quantify this value somehow. We've got two main methods, quantitative and qualitative. The textbooks always seem to stress the quantitative methods, using objective monetary values like calculating the annualized loss expectancy, the ALE.
The ALE approach is, well, it's mathematically rigorous. You have to assign a single loss expectancy, an SLE, to an event, then calculate the annualized rate of occurrence, the ARO, and multiply them.
So ALE equals SLE times ARO.
Correct. It's objective, but, and here's the strategic insight for you. It's prohibitively complex and time-consuming for most modern businesses. I mean, how do you assign an ARO to a zero-day attack?
You can't. It's just a guess.
It's complete guesswork. And that's why, in the real world, most organizations rely almost entirely on qualitative methods. I mean, qualitative valuation uses relative rankings based on expert judgment. It's just simpler and faster. You're classifying data as high, medium, or low value.
Or using categories like confidential or public.
Precisely. And the core strategic insight for the CISP is that speed and agility are everything in business. So while quantitative methods exist on paper, that qualitative ranking is the ultimate strategic driver for what controls you actually implement.
Okay, so if that qualitative ranking determines everything that comes after, how do we even begin applying it across a huge organization? Oh, I guess you have to know what you have first.
You have to. You must start with the asset identification process. The first, most crucial step is creating an asset inventory. Some people call it a catalog or a registry.
You can't manage what you don't know exists.
You can't manage, you can't classify, you can't protect assets systematically if you don't know they exist.
And the sources really stress that this inventory has to be created with a top-down approach. So why is starting with critical business processes more important than just, say, running a network scan to see what devices are out there?
Because a bottom-up scan might inventory, I don't know, 10,000 devices, but it won't tell you which 5 are critical for running payroll.
Ah, I see.
A top-down approach ensures that the assets that support the mission of the organization, the crown jewels, are identified and prioritized first. You protect the value, not just the quantity.
And the inventory itself has to be incredibly detailed. It's more than just the name and location, right? What are some of the less obvious details you need?
Crucially, it has to document the asset owner, which we'll get to next, its classification, annual maintenance cost, its projected lifespan, and the required protection level based on that classification. That catalog is your single source of truth for security.
I noticed the domain specifically calls out some assets that kind of hide in plain sight, like kiosk service points, ATMs, POS devices.
Right. They process data but don't usually retain it long-term. They're entry points.
High-value entry points.
Exactly. They're transit points for extremely high-value data. We also have to document process control data, the logs, instrument readings, commands sent to infrastructure.
Stuff that, if it gets altered, could have a massive integrity and availability impact.
Huge. And then there are the configuration management databases, the CMDBs. Why do you think these are so often cited as high-value assets themselves?
Well, I'd guess because they're not just a list, they're the blueprint.
The organization's DNA, that's a great way to put it. It records configurations, makes, models, versions, dependencies. If a device fails, the CMDB has the blueprint for how to restore it.
So if an attacker compromises the CMDB,
They have the map. They have the instructions for how to cripple your entire environment. CMDBs are assets that must be protected with the highest level of confidentiality and integrity controls.
that makes perfect sense. Okay, so once we've identified, valued, and inventoried our assets, we logically move on to governance.
Right. Assets don't secure themselves. People manage the security process. And the CISSP framework really scrutinizes that governance structure. Who is accountable for those protections?
And this is where we hit what I think is the first major concept trap for people studying. The crucial distinction that system ownership and data ownership are two completely different concepts.
Oh, absolutely. I might own the server, but the head of HR owns the employee data that's stored on it.
The system is the container. The data is the content.
Exactly. And the governance framework has to reflect that. Now, to manage this whole process systematically, we rely on some established mnemonics. There's the high-level one, BCP.
Value, classify, protect.
That's the simple conceptual model.
And then there's the more operational checklist, the longer one, CACPA.
Right. Create inventory, assign ownership, classify, protect, and then assess and review. That sequence really walks you through the entire managerial lifecycle.
Okay, let's drill down into that assign ownership step. We need to clearly define these roles and pay special attention to the difference between, accountability and responsibility.
That's the one. Let's start at the very top. The data owner, or under regulations like GDPR, the data controller.
This is the highest level of authority.
This is a senior leader, a functional manager. Think the VP of Finance or the Chief Medical Officer. They have the ultimate power. They set the data policy, they determine the classification levels, that qualitative ranking we talked about, and they approve access.
And most importantly,
the owner is accountable for the asset's protection.
okay, so let me challenge that.
Yeah.
If the owner delegates all the day-to-day security tasks, like running backups and patching the system to the IT department, who is the data custodian, and the custodian misses a critical patch, why does the owner still take the fall?
That is the absolute crux of the managerial mindset. Accountability is non-delegable. Think of it like a corporate board member's fiduciary duty.
Okay.
They delegate the execution of financial tasks to the CFO, but if the company commits fraud, the board member is still legally accountable. The owner delegated the responsibility, the task, but they retain the ultimate accountability, the liability.
That makes the stakes crystal clear. And we mentioned the term data controller is often preferred, especially under laws like GDPR, because it implies the organization controls the fate of user data, even if they don't legally own it.
Correct. It's a more accurate term. Moving down the hierarchy, we find the data steward. This role is delegated by the owner and holds the business responsibility.
And what's the steward's main focus?
Quality and compliance for the business. The steward makes sure the data isn't just protected, but that it's also accurate, useful, and compliant for business processes. They're the quality assurance arm, making sure, for instance, that all customer records have the right fields filled out and the data is fit for purpose.
Then we get to the more hands-on roles, the data custodian. This is where the rubber meets the road, technically.
The custodian holds the technical responsibility. This is your IT staff, your security team, your ops team. Their job is the execution of the policy. Storing and processing information, ensuring technical protections are in place.
Backups, availability, logical controls.
All of it. They are responsible for the execution, but if a data integrity breach happens, they're responsible to the owner, who is still accountable to the executive team.
Got it. We also have the data processor. This is someone who handles data on behalf of the owner, but isn't internal staff.
The classic modern example is any third-party service, especially a cloud service provider. The CSP handles the execution, they run the database, but the original organization is still the controller and owner, and they retain the ultimate liability.
And finally, the data user.
Yeah.
Just the folks who work with the data.
The customer service rep, the accountant. Their responsibility is just to handle the data safely according to policy. And we could also mention the data subject, the patient or customer. Not a security role, but they're the whole reason this protection is necessary in the first place.
This whole hierarchy of roles, especially separating that non-delegable accountability from delegable responsibility.
That's where the CISSP exam loves to ask its hardest questions. You have to not only memorize the definitions, but apply them to these complex scenarios involving third parties and custodians and owners.
That distinction, accountable versus responsible, it's incredibly nuanced. It really needs targeted study to solidify those relationships, especially when you have multiple parties involved. You need a way to just quiz yourself on these definitional differences.
Exactly. Knowing the definition of a data custodian is one thing, but knowing whether the custodian is responsible for setting encryption standards or just responsible for executing the owner's encryption standard, that's another level.
And that's where a tool designed for certifications preparation like /Genius can really help you master these critical relationships and how they apply in the real world before you sit for the exam.
It really can. You need that rapid fire practice.
Okay, moving on from ownership, let's get into classification. This is the engine that drives every single control decision that comes later. But first, let's clear up the terminology. Classification versus categorization.
Sure. Classification is the system or the structure the organization defines. It's the established hierarchy of labels, public, internal, confidential, secret.
And categorization is the act of doing it.
It's the action of sorting a specific asset or data set into one of those defined classes. It's applying the rule set.
And once we categorize it, we need a way for both systems and people to understand its sensitivity. That's where labeling and marking come in.
They work in tandem. Labeling is the classification level itself, and it has to be system readable. This is the metadata tag that lets a DLP tool or some other automated system recognize the data sensitivity.
And marking is for the humans.
Marking is the handling instructions, and it must be human readable. This is the footer on the document or the stamp that says, do not email externally or shred immediately. And both of them have to be applied consistently.
The whole system is really underpinned by policy. The sources call policy the foundational authority of the security program. They're not suggestions, they're the rules.
That's right. And there are several specific policy types we have to know. The data classification policy assigns the categories and dictates handling requirements. The data storage policy defines where you can store it, the access controls, and the encryption needs for data at rest.
Then you've got the data transmission policy, which is all about how data moves, defining the right mechanisms and encryption for data in motion.
But the one that's most often neglected, and the one that causes the most compliance headaches, is the data lifecycle policy. This covers data retention, the minimum and the maximum time you can hold data, and, of course, proper disposal techniques.
If you don't have a clear, enforceable retention policy, you are just hoarding liabilities.
Just hoarding risk.
And that retention piece leads us straight to this strategic principle of data minimization. Why is this so important for security pros, even though it sounds more like a legal concept?
Because the best way to reduce your risk is to simply not gather or keep the data in the first place. An organization cannot be held responsible for data it never collected. Every piece of PII you keep is a latent liability just waiting for a breach.
So practically, what does that look like? It sounds great on paper, but the culture in most businesses is to hoard data just in case it might be useful later.
It takes proactive work. First, minimizing the amount of data you collect. Only ask for what is absolutely necessary. Second, making sure your retention practices are fair and lawful, which means you need automation to delete unneeded info as quickly as you're legally allowed to.
You need a tight integration with the legal and compliance teams for that.
You do. And from a compliance perspective, if you decide to use existing data for a totally new purpose, say, you want to use customer transaction data for a new AI modeling project, you typically need to get new consent before you do that.
Because the original consent was for a specific purpose.
Exactly. Using it for something else violates the minimization and fairness principles that are baked into modern privacy law. This is governance actively dictating technical process.
Okay, so to manage security throughout its lifetime, we have to look at the data lifecycle stages: create, storage, use, share, archive, and destroy. And while that sounds linear,
It's not. The reality is that data can jump between stages really quickly. You can create something and immediately share it, for instance.
and the big security challenge is that the controls you need change radically depending on what state the data is in. So we categorize data into three main states. Let's start with data at rest data, just sitting on physical media.
Data at rest is vulnerable to basically two things: theft of the physical media or unauthorized access by an administrator.
So the controls are pretty straightforward.
They are. The strongest controls are physical security lock, the server room strong access controls like RBAC and MFA, and of course encryption. Full disk encryption, or using self-encrypting drives, SEDs, for hardware-level protection.
Okay, next up is data in motion or in transit. This is data moving across any network, so it's vulnerable to eavesdropping and interception.
Right. And the protection methods here are all about cryptographic tunneling and secure protocols, SSLTL SIPISEC, encapsulating data with VPNs. But the distinction between the methods here is really critical for the exam.
We've got end-to-end encryption. What's the key thing to know there?
The data portion is encrypted from the source application to the final destination application. It stays encrypted across all the intermediate routers and switches.
Its strength is confidentiality.
But its necessary weakness is that the routing info, the IP header and metadata, has to stay in plain text so the network nodes know where to send the packet. It protects the content, but not the fact that the communication is happening.
Now contrast that with link encryption.
Link encryption encrypts the entire packet header and data, but only between two directly connected nodes.
So it hides the routing information.
It does, but the downside is trust. Because the whole packet is encrypted between node A and node B, it has to be decrypted at node B to figure out the next hop. So every single intermediate node has to be highly trusted. You see this more in high-security, point-to-point leased lines.
We should probably mention onion networks like TOR. How does that fit into standard enterprise protection? Is it mostly academic for the CISSP?
It's an important concept to understand the limits of encryption. Onion networks use multiple layers of encryption, like an onion. Each node only decrypts one layer to find the next hop. It provides amazing confidentiality and anonymity, but the trade-off is massive performance degradation.
So not for typical business traffic.
No, but it showcases maximum data flow protection through layered cryptography.
And finally, data in use. This feels like the most precarious state, because to actually process the data, it has to be decrypted and accessible in system memory.
And that vulnerability is systemic. Protection here shifts to very local controls: physical security like screen guards and a clean desk policy, robust logical controls like strict RBAC, and critically, data loss prevention DLP to monitor how that data is being used by the application and the user.
Okay, let's apply these three states to the complex world of the cloud. The rule of thumb is that you have to apply the same level of security controls in the cloud as you would on-prem, but the execution is trickier.
It really is. The protection methods are still encryption and access control, but the cloud environment shifts the burden of key management. The client organization absolutely must protect their encryption keys.
And the sources are really clear on this, right?
They are. Managing your cloud encryption keys on premises, using your own dedicated hardware security modules or key management service, is considered significantly more secure than letting the cloud provider manage them.
Why is that difference so critical? Isn't it just easier to let the cloud provider handle the keys?
It's easier, but it means the provider can technically decrypt your data, either through an internal compromise or, more likely, through a legal request, like a subpoena.
Oh.
If you manage the key, the subpoena comes to you, and you control the availability of that key. It's the ultimate boundary of client control in the cloud's shared responsibility model.
Now, for the major compliance challenge that hits global businesses, data residency. versus data sovereignty. This is a huge point of confusion.
It is. Data residency is the easy part. It's just the physical location where data is stored and processed. Choosing AWS SES1 or a data center in Ireland. It's a physical fact, but it's not enough for compliance.
And data sovereignty is the tricky legal overlay on top of that.
Sovereignty is the legal authority a nation has over data concerning its citizens, regardless of where that data is physically stored. The analogy I like is, residency is the suitcase where the data is kept. Sovereignty is the passport that determines whose laws apply to the data inside, no matter where the suitcase is.
So GDPR is the classic example. EU law follows EU citizen data, even if it's stored on a US server farm.
That's the compliance nightmare. And it gets even harder with localization mandates. These regulations require both residency storage has to be in-country and submission to the local jurisdiction, so sovereignty as well.
Like China's cybersecurity law.
Exactly. And the implication for security professionals is huge. Sovereignty mandates create fragmented security controls, they complicate centralized monitoring, and they force you to have highly localized key management strategies, especially where governments demand access to the keys. It forces geopolitics into your technical design.
Okay, let's shift to specific controls designed to protect data. Starting with the rights management tools, digital rights management, DRM, and information rights management, IRM. They sound almost identical, but their applications are very different.
They serve distinct masters. DRM protects the rights of intellectual property creators and copyright holders for digital media, music, movies, ebooks. It uses encryption and licensing to control how content is consumed, to stop unauthorized mass copying.
Whereas IRM is designed to protect trade secrets and IP within the organization. The internal stuff.
And IRM is way more granular and portable. It works by embedding access controls directly into the file, no matter where it's stored.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A confidential budget memo can be set to allow viewing only by the VP of Finance, block printing, block saving a new copy, and automatically expire after 48 hours. Those security rules travel with the file, even if it gets emailed outside the corporate network.
That's a huge functional difference. IRM maintains control even after the data leaves your trusted boundary.
It's data-centric security at its best. Related to this, we have digital watermarks. These can visibly or invisibly mark copyright ownership and let you trace unauthorized copies back to who leaked it.
But, and this is a critical limitation, a watermark does not prevent copying. It only helps you trace it after the fact. That's why you often see it paired with DRM or IRM.
Right. And next is the real powerhouse tool of data protection. Data loss prevention, or DLP. This covers the tools and processes that identify, monitor, and protect sensitive info from unwanted disclosure, whether it's accidental or malicious.
And where does DLP operate?
It operates across all three data states. In use, it monitors things like clipboard actions. In motion, it's monitoring email and network traffic. And at rest, it's scanning network shares and databases for unencrypted sensitive files. It's the constant surveillance system for your information.
This brings us right back to classification.
Yeah.
DLP is pretty much useless without a strong data classification system in place, isn't it?
It's an absolute prerequisite. DLP can't prevent all leakage. It has to be told what to prioritize. The classification policy dictates the rules. A poorly classified environment means your DLP tool will either block too much and create business friction, or block too little and create risk.
We also have techniques for information obfuscation. These are methods to make sensitive data obscure, often for things like non-production testing.
Right. They hide the true value. Concealing data just removes access. Pruning or trimming removes or shortens sensitive parts, like only showing the last 4 digits of a social security number.
And fabricating data.
Fabricating data means you replace real sensitive data with realistic but fake data for testing. And of course, encrypting data turns it into ciphertext.
These concepts, DRM, IRM, DLP, obfuscation, they really demand critical thinking because they're all tools for the same goal, protection, but with very different tactical applications.
The differences are subtle but crucial for making managerial decisions. If you're preparing for a cert that tests strategic application, knowing not just what DRM is, but why you would choose IRM over it for an internal memo, that's essential.
That level of nuanced application, testing your knowledge against competing controls, is exactly what you need to master.
Yeah, and if you find yourself struggling to differentiate between when to apply IRM versus when to use DLP, or whether crypto shredding is superior to DGossing for modern media, you need focused review.
That's where things like practice questions and flashcards, like those from Flash Genius for certifications preparation, are invaluable for testing your knowledge against these specific nuanced distinctions.
They really are.
So supporting the entire asset lifecycle requires robust technical governance, starting with security baselines.
A baseline is a set of minimum standards for systems. It's generic enough to cover an uncertain future, but it ensures a base level of protection before any system goes live.
And these are highly specific, right? They'd include required OS settings, minimum encryption standards for mobile devices, that sort of thing.
Exactly. The baseline is the secure configuration standard. And building on that, we have system hardening. This is the operational process of removing unnecessary components to reduce the attack surface.
This isn't a one-time thing. It's ongoing maintenance. What does hardening typically involve?
It involves removing unneeded services and protocols, always with change control, of course installing patches, renaming default admin accounts, and enabling security configurations like auditing and logging. If a service isn't strictly necessary for the system's function, it's a liability. Hardening removes it.
Now, organizations shouldn't spend years developing these standards from scratch. We should be leveraging industry knowledge.
Precisely. Leveraging industry standards provides an excellent peer-reviewed starting point. You can get them from vendors like Microsoft, government frameworks like NIST, and independent orgs like CIS benchmarks.
Can an organization's internal standard ever deviate from those industry benchmarks?
Yes, but only in one direction. They have to be customized to be more stringent. Any deviation that makes your standard less secure has to be thoroughly documented, justified by a risk assessment, and formally approved. That's managerial accountability in action.
Okay, let's pivot to physical asset protection. Media security controls. This covers any physical or digital storage. Tapes, HDDs, SSDs, cloud environments.
And you need both physical and logical protection. For physical protection, you're securing the storage environment. Locked cabinets, server rooms with layered access controls, and environmental controls.
Temperature and humidity are critical for magnetic media.
Very critical. Magnetic media is vulnerable above about 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 Celsius. And when that media has to move, secure transport is key. You need tamper-evident seals and a strict chain of custody procedure.
And then logical protection is layered on top.
That's your strong encryption like AES 256, robust access controls, and comprehensive audit trails. And it doesn't matter if the media is a physical tape or a virtual volume in the cloud, these logical controls are paramount.
It's a great reminder that even in the most technical domains, physical controls are still the foundation. If someone can just walk off with the hard drive, no amount of logical protection matters if that drive isn't encrypted.
That's the bottom line.
Now, the end of the data's useful life brings us to retention and destruction. Data retention policies are essential, and they have to define both the minimum retention period, what the law requires, and the maximum retention period.
The maximum period is so important for risk minimization. Data should be kept only as long as it's necessary, but no longer. Every day you retain unneeded PII is another day you are exposed to liability.
You can't breach data you don't possess.
You can't. Automated deletion is critical for enforcing this.
And when we talk about old data, we have to distinguish between archiving and backups.
Right. A backup is an operational copy of current data for fault tolerance, for quick recovery. An archive is old, infrequently accessed data, kept for compliance or historical needs, often on cheaper, slower storage. But, and this is crucial, archive data keeps its original classification and needs the same level of protection.
And once that data is finally flagged for disposal, we have to deal with the problem of data remnants.
Simple deletion or formatting is never, ever enough.
Because it leaves behind a residue.
Data remnants is the residual magnetism or data residue left behind. A quick format only removes the pointer to the file. The bits are still recoverable with forensic tools. For real security, you need defensible destruction, securely destroying data in a legally defensible, compliant way so it is totally unrecoverable.
Okay, let's walk through the three main categories of sanitization, from least to best assurance. This is a crucial differentiator on the exam.
The least reassuring method is clearing. This is overwriting the data with new, non-sensitive data like all zeros or all ones. It'll frustrate casual recovery, but a sophisticated lab might still be able to reconstruct it.
Next up, offering a higher level of assurance is purging.
Purging techniques ensure data can't be reconstructed by common lab analysis. This includes degaussing, which uses a powerful magnetic field on hard drives and tapes to scramble the data beyond recovery. But degaussing doesn't work on non-magnetic media like SSDs.
And the technique that works across all modern media, including cloud volumes and SSDs.
That would be crypto shredding. If the data was encrypted to begin with, purging is as simple as securely destroying all copies of the encryption key. Without the key, the ciphertext is useless garbage. This is the preferred method for cloud and hybrid environments.
And the absolute gold standard, the best of the best.
Destruction, physically obliterating the media, melting, burning, shredding, pulping, drilling. If you must guarantee absolute deletion, physical destruction is the only certain way. And you have to get a certificate of destruction for your legal audit trail. That's the defensible part.
All right, our final section wraps up the operational controls that keep asset security stable over time, starting with change management.
This is the formal control mechanism to stop systems from drifting away from their secure baseline. It's all about standardization to reduce risk.
And every proposed alteration has to go through a formal request for change, or RFC.
And that RFC has to be exhaustive. A description, the expected impact, risk assessment, the rollback steps if it fails, a schedule, and a list of all affected configuration items or CIs.
And changes are rarely approved by just one person.
No, they're typically reviewed by a change advisory board or CAB to make sure all stakeholders, security, ops, business owners, agree that the benefit outweighs the risk.
Change management works in lockstep with configuration management, CM, which tracks the specific device settings.
And CM relies on that baseline, the known, secure snapshot. The whole point of CM is to monitor for drift, to spot unauthorized changes by comparing the current state to that approved baseline.
We also use versioning assigning numbers like version.major.minor to track configuration updates, especially in software development.
And physical asset management follows a strict lifecycle too. It starts with inventorying, goes through requesting, ordering, receiving, tagging, and updating inventory records at every single step. If you don't track the physical location, your security is fundamentally compromised.
Finally, we have to talk about the massive modern risk vector. Supply chain vulnerabilities and the critical end of life, or EOL, stages of assets. Running products without vendor support is just asking for trouble.
The supply chain risk is twofold. First, vulnerabilities from third-party software dependencies. Second, the risk from the product lifecycle itself. You have to know the stages. End of sale, where it's no longer sold but still supported.
Then end of support, where support is reduced and patches might become intermittent.
And finally, end of life, which means no support, no security patches, nothing.
The danger of EOL is so severe. If a critical vulnerability is found in an EOL operating system, you have zero path to patching it. You're immediately exposed.
So organizations have to proactively mitigate these vendor dependencies. If you rely on a cloud provider or a critical software vendor, you need contractual clauses and technical plans for business continuity. What happens if they just go out of business?
You have to have a plan.
You must have offsite backups and migration plans ready, because that accountability, remember, extends to your third parties.
This domain really forces the security professional to think so holistically. From the initial business decision to collect data, all the way through to making sure the hardware and software used to process it are actively supported. That was an intensive journey. We've covered the entire life of an asset in Domain 2, from valuing the intangible idea of reputation, assigning ownership, implementing rights management, and finally, managing supply chain risk and the defensible destruction of media.
The key takeaway for anyone studying for the CISSP is to really embrace that managerial mindset. Protection starts with ownership and classification. The most challenging part isn't installing the technical control, it's ensuring consistency.
Consistency.
Whether data is being created, used, archived, or destroyed, that original managerially assigned classification level must dictate the control you apply at every single step.
That consistency is the manager's ultimate liability. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on. We know physical destruction, melting, shredding is the most secure method for media disposal for tangible hardware.
Right.
But as organizations move entirely to logical media virtual machines, containers, data volumes in multi-tenant cloud storage where you don't control the physical hardware, what is the strategic and legally defensible equivalent of physical destruction?
Crypto shredding offers a logical path by destroying the key. But does that satisfy the legal requirements for defensible destruction in every single jurisdiction? It's a question of physical certainty versus cryptographic assurance.
And as one will define asset security for the next decade. Something to think about as you review these core concepts and get ready to apply them strategically. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll see you next time.